Good evening, everyone. Ofer, thank you for that kind introduction. And I'll say that while I'm very proud of the organizational roles that Ofer noted, I want to say that tonight I am speaking for myself and not on behalf of any organization. But I knew that when Ofer invited me to speak here tonight, that I needed to say yes. This is, I think, a unique and demanding moment in U.S.-Israel relations, and it's one that requires American Jewish leaders to recalibrate how and when and why we speak about Israel. And tonight I intend to speak candidly and bluntly. Let's first start with what we know to be true. Yes, Hamas is a terrorist organization, and October 7th will be remembered as one of the darkest days in the history of the Jewish people. And it is unconscionable that Hamas still holds more than 130 hostages in captivity. Yes, the response of so much of the world has been unbearable to watch, especially in its callous disregard for Jewish lives and the unwillingness of so many people to acknowledge the truth of what happened that day. And yes, a virulent anti-Semitism that we thought was relegated to the fringes of society has been normalized into mainstream life, especially on our college campuses. And yes, Hamas knowingly puts Gazan civilians in harm's way and purposefully embeds itself in hospitals, schools, and mosques. There is no but to offer to any of what I've just said. There is nothing that could water down or diminish the tragedy of October 7th or the dangers we now face. But if that is all we say, it is not enough. We are doing a disservice to our community and to Israel if we stop there. For although there is no but, there must be a yes and. We and the entire world must condemn Hamas, and we must acknowledge that Hamas's control over Gaza has been an explicit part of Netanyahu's foreign policy over the past decade. The hundreds of millions of dollars from Qatar, dollars that funded the building of the tunnels and the weaponry used by Hamas, entered Gaza with the full permission and approval of the Netanyahu government. Propping up Hamas as a counterweight to the Palestinian Authority became a higher priority than protecting the families living in the Gaza envelope. We must acknowledge that the recklessness of this policy was laid bare on October 7th, and these families have paid the most horrible price, along with the young people who came to the Nova Music Festival and the brave IDF soldiers and reservists who have been killed and wounded in the war. We need to support Israel's efforts to defeat Hamas, and we must demand that the people of Gaza not die of starvation in the process. Israelis may not be seeing the images from Gaza, but we can see the images of people so hungry and desperate for food that they are dying in stampedes. We need to demand that the hostages be released, and be released now. And we need to acknowledge that there are key actors in the current Israeli coalition government for whom the resettlement of Gaza seems a much higher priority than bringing the hostages home. Some people say that all of this will be investigated and dealt with when the war is over, that elections will happen when the war is over. Yet it also seems clear that this government, for its own political reasons, may very well prefer a war with no end. And let's talk about the United States and the role of American Jews and of all the people who live here, because we too have a stake in the outcome. For one, we do not want to see our country embroiled in a Middle East war that could have been avoided. Two, we expect that Israel and the US, as its strongest ally, will be working in close collaboration. Since October 7th, no world leader has offered more consistent support for Israel than President Biden. Yet I fear that the gifts of time, resources, and room to maneuver that President Biden provided may be squandered. They may be squandered if this war goes on without a discernible strategy and without a plan for what the region looks like the day after the war or the months and years after the war. And three, as leaders here in the Bay Area, we need to be able to speak intelligently and in good conscience with those around us. As I know is true of many of you, I have non-Jewish friends and relatives with questions. They know how much I care about Israel, and they know the strength and depth of my Zionism. And they watch the ongoing carnage in Gaza, and they ask me, what do American Jews want? What is our vision for what happens when the war is over? What outcome could bring some kind of meaning to all the suffering they are seeing nightly on CNN? And I tell them, well, I don't speak for all American Jews, But I think most American Jews support President Biden's vision, a vision of a roadmap that step by step will one day lead to two states living side by side in peace. That we want both Israelis and Palestinians to be able to live lives of dignity, lives lived in freedom and safety and security. Yet it does not escape these same people's attention that the Israeli prime minister and much of his cabinet are regularly in the news, loudly proclaiming their opposition to such a plan. We cannot continue to mouth platitudes about a region living in peace while we support a government that seems intent on following the same failed policies of the past. And finally, people say that we are meddling in Israeli politics and we should stay out of the fray. And yes, of course, it will be Israelis who will decide when elections will be held and who the winners will be. But two things strike me as deeply ironic about this charge. For one, it only seems to arise when progressive Jews make their voices heard on political issues in Israel. Right-wing American Jews have been using their massive resources for decades to put their thumbs on the scale of Israeli politics. Just look, for example, at Israel Hayom, the free pro-Netanyahu newspaper. But the even greater irony and danger to us is that the current Israeli leadership seems to have no shame in taking sides in our politics in ways that now pose a great threat to our democracy and to the safety and security of Jews in America. Despite all the support from President Biden, it seems apparent that Netanyahu thinks it is in his political interest for him to be on a collision course with our president. And of course, it would be an added bonus to him if such a conflict were to damage Biden in our upcoming elections. Netanyahu's courtship of Trump and the Republican Party has been happening in plain sight for the past decade or more. And at this moment, the risks of this strategy to American Jews and to our country more generally couldn't be greater. In the last few days, Donald Trump has made the most anti-Semitic comments ever uttered by a major candidate for president. He says that Jews who vote for Democrats hate Israel. With those words, Donald Trump has smeared 70% of the American Jewish community, probably more than 80% of the Bay Area Jewish community. So he's not out to demonize all Jews, only those of us who have the audacity to not support him. Jews who care about democracy, about women's rights, reproductive freedom, racial justice, LGBT equality, the fair treatment of immigrants, and who want science-based policies to deal with the environment and climate change. Netanyahu would throw us and all of this under the bus in his quest to stay in power and to stay out of jail. Israel stands at a turning point. It can choose to ally itself with the liberal democracies of the Western world and strive to live up to the values espoused in its Declaration of Independence. Or it can abandon its proud 75-year history and join forces with Vladimir Putin, Viktor Orban, Donald Trump, and all those who would seek to move the world toward autocracy and dictatorship. We all know that Jews will not fare well in that world. So I hope that the people of Israel will demand an opportunity now to elect a government that will make better choices. Thank you.